When I moved in, she warned me, some rules are meant to be broken. I didn't know she meant my heart. The moment I stepped off the bus, the city seemed unusually quiet, as if holding its breath. My small suitcase bumped against the cracked sidewalk as I made my way toward the apartment building I'd chosen at random online. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just a brick building with ivy crawling up its sides, but there was something quietly inviting about it, a warmth in its simplicity. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and a faint scent of lavender and old books drifted toward me. The lobby was small, furnished with a worn rug and a few potted plants that leaned lazily toward the sunlight filtering in from the tall windows. And then I saw her. She was arranging a stack of letters on a small counter, her movements precise yet unhurried. Her hair fell softly over one shoulder, catching the light in auburn highlights. She looked up, and our eyes met. There was a brief pause, like an invisible string had pulled me closer. She smiled, a smile that was both welcoming and mischievous, the kind that suggested she knew more than she let on. "Welcome," she said, her voice low and smooth, carrying just enough warmth to make a quiet ripple of comfort spread through me. "You must be the new tenant. I'm glad you're here." Her words were simple, but the way she said them made me acutely aware of the space between us. I noticed the slight curve of her lips, the subtle arch of her eyebrows, and the way her hands moved with elegance as she gestured toward the apartment keys. My hand brushed hers as I took them, brief, accidental, but enough to leave a warmth lingering in my palm. "Some rules are meant to be broken," she added, almost as an afterthought, a playful glint in her eye. I stopped mid-step, caught between curiosity and confusion. Did she mean the building's rules, or something else entirely? I tried to focus on the apartment itself, noting the high ceilings and sunlit kitchen, but my attention kept drifting back to her. There was an easy confidence in the way she moved, yet a subtle vulnerability in the way her eyes softened when she laughed at my clumsy attempt to balance my suitcase. It was the kind of presence that demanded awareness, that made ordinary moments feel charged with possibility. By the time I settled in, unpacking a few essentials and arranging my things just so, I realized I was already anticipating the next encounter with her, whether it was a hallway greeting, a casual smile, or the sound of her voice echoing down the stairwell. That brief, fleeting interaction had left a mark, like the first brush of autumn wind against bare skin, sharp, unexpected, and strangely exhilarating. I wasn't sure what the rules she mentioned were, or what it meant to break them, but I knew one thing: moving in was only the beginning. Something in the air between us felt like it was waiting to unfold, and I had a feeling I was going to want to see exactly how. By the second day in the apartment, I had started to notice the little details that made the building different. A sign on the hallway wall read, "Quiet after 10 p.m., but laughter is allowed." Another note, near the windowsill, forbade rearranging the potted plants. I thought of these as quaint rules, charmingly old-fashioned, until I accidentally moved a small fern to let in more sunlight. She noticed immediately. The next morning, she appeared in the hallway, her presence quiet but unmistakable. "I see you've discovered my rules," she said, tilting her head with a knowing smile. Her hands rested lightly on the railing, and for a moment, I couldn't look away. There was something in the way she observed me, not judgmental, not harsh, but curious, as though she were measuring how far I would go, or how boldly I might break them. "I thought it needed more light," I mumbled, trying to sound casual, though my pulse had sped up. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to linger in the air like a melody you wanted to play on repeat. She stepped closer under the pretense of adjusting the plant herself, and our hands brushed. It was fleeting, but the warmth of her touch lingered far longer than it should have. I felt a flutter in my chest, a mix of excitement and hesitation. Her fingers were delicate yet confident as they moved past mine, and I realized I was already acutely aware of every movement she made. "You're braver than most," she said, her voice softer now, almost conspiratorial. "Or perhaps just curious enough to find out what happens when rules are bent." I swallowed, unsure how to respond. Her gaze lingered on me in a way that made my thoughts scatter. It wasn't flirtation in the obvious sense, but something subtler, a warmth, an unspoken invitation, a tension that hummed just beneath the surface. That afternoon, I found myself watching her from my apartment window as she tended to the small garden by the building entrance. She moved with a quiet grace, bending to water flowers, adjusting leaves, or brushing her hair from her face. I caught myself wishing my presence wasn't so conspicuous, yet part of me hoped she would notice me noticing her. When she finally looked up and met my eyes, she smiled, just a fraction, and then returned to her plants. My chest tightened, a mix of longing and hesitation I wasn't used to feeling. By evening, the rules had taken on a new meaning. I realized they weren't just about plants, quiet hours, or minor decor. They were about moments of connection, curiosity, and subtle tests of comfort. Every small violation became an opportunity for a shared glance, a fleeting touch, or a quiet laugh. It was as though she was teaching me to see the rules not as restrictions, but as a framework for intimacy, for closeness that could unfold slowly, almost imperceptibly. And I found myself wanting to break them, not out of defiance, but because each little rule I bent brought me closer to her. The thought made my stomach tighten and my heart race in ways I wasn't prepared for, yet it was thrilling. Somehow, even in the quiet corridors and sunlit hallways, the building felt charged with possibility. Days had passed, and the rhythm of the building began to feel like its own small world. I'd started to notice the little routines she had, the way she watered the plants on the balcony at the same time each morning, or how she lingered over a book in the lounge, as if savoring every page. One afternoon, I happened to be in the hallway when she was carrying a tray of tea from her apartment. "Care for some company?" she asked, her voice casual but warm, the kind that made even ordinary moments feel intimate. I nodded, feeling a flutter in my chest that I had come to recognize whenever she looked my way. We sat together on the narrow balcony, the sunlight spilling across the floorboards, the city buzzing faintly in the distance. She poured the tea, and the aroma of chamomile mixed with the faint scent of her perfume, a delicate blend of warmth and something elusive I couldn't quite name. I felt acutely aware of the space between us, yet every movement felt electric. As we sipped in silence, she began to talk, first about inconsequential things, the way the morning light hit the courtyard, a book she had just finished, but then, gradually, she revealed more. A story from her youth, about a choice she had made and regretted, about a fear she had carried for years. Her eyes softened as she spoke, and I realized that behind her graceful confidence, there was a quiet vulnerability, something she rarely let anyone see. I wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but the right moment didn't arrive. Instead, our hands brushed accidentally when she adjusted the teacup on the railing. The contact was light, fleeting, yet it left a warmth that lingered in my fingers long after she had pulled back. My chest tightened as if reminding me how alive I felt in her presence. "You always notice things," she said softly, looking at me with an intensity that made me pause. "Even the little things that nobody else cares about." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled, feeling that strange mix of exhilaration and hesitation that had become familiar. She leaned back slightly, her shoulder grazing mine, and I realized how much I wanted these moments to last, to linger in the quiet closeness of the balcony, the gentle warmth of sunlight and tea, and the soft cadence of her voice. For the first time, I understood that the rules she had mentioned weren't just playful quirks. They were subtle invitations to connect, to test boundaries gently, to allow closeness in a world that often demanded distance. Every glance, every accidental brush of fingers, was part of a rhythm neither of us needed to define yet, but both of us felt. As I left that afternoon, walking back to my apartment with a slightly lighter step, I couldn't shake the memory of her eyes, the curve of her lips as she smiled, the quiet vulnerability she had revealed. Something had shifted. I wasn't just observing her anymore. I was drawn in, aware that every small shared moment was quietly pulling us closer. And yet, the tension lingered, unspoken but palpable, leaving me both thrilled and nervous for what the next encounter might bring. It was raining that evening when I found myself caught outside, umbrella forgotten in my apartment. The streets glistened with the reflection of the city lights, droplets pattering softly against the pavement. And there she was, walking toward me, umbrella in hand, her silhouette outlined by the warm glow of a nearby street lamp. "Looks like you could use this," she said, offering the umbrella with a small, teasing smile. I hesitated, caught between pride and gratitude, and she chuckled lightly, a sound that wrapped around me like a soft blanket. The umbrella was too small for both of us, so we walked close, shoulders brushing, sharing the space without words. The rain drummed gently overhead, a private soundtrack that made the world outside fade away. She spoke first, hesitantly, about regrets and mischances, not just hers, but life in general, about the paths people choose and the doors they leave unopened. I listened, fascinated by how effortlessly she could make vulnerability feel natural. There was a sincerity in her voice that invited honesty, a quiet invitation I found impossible to ignore. "I don't often talk about this," she admitted, glancing at me briefly, then back to the rain-streaked street. "But I suppose everyone has something they keep tucked away. Something they wish they'd done differently." I nodded, feeling my chest tighten. For a moment I thought of all the times I had played it safe, the words I hadn't said, the risks I hadn't taken. And yet, here I was, sharing a space with someone whose presence made the ordinary feel profound. My hand brushed hers lightly as we walked, accidental but electric, and I felt the familiar warmth settle in my chest. "You always seem to notice things," I said softly, thinking of the subtle gestures, the unspoken emotions she revealed in small ways. "Even the things people try to hide." Her eyes met mine under the umbrella, a pause stretching between us. It was unspoken, yet loaded with meaning, a silent acknowledgement that we were both feeling more than we dared to admit. The rain continued to fall around us, the sound grounding yet intimate, a private world where nothing else mattered. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but hesitation held me back. She, too, seemed caught between impulse and restraint, her hand hovering near mine, the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine every few steps. Every moment was charged, yet delicate, an intricate dance of desire, curiosity, and caution. By the time we reached the building, either of us had spoken outright of the feelings simmering beneath the surface. Yet, in that silence, a profound connection had been formed. I realized that the age difference, the rules, the caution, they didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was the quiet honesty, the shared vulnerability, and the delicate tension that left both of us yearning for more, without daring to speak it aloud. As she waved me inside, the umbrella dripping between us, I felt an ache of anticipation. Something was shifting, a slow, inexorable pull drawing us closer, and I knew that the next encounter would carry the weight of this quiet confession. I didn't know where it would lead, but I was ready to feel every step of the way. The building had a quiet rhythm to it, but that evening felt different. I had returned from the grocery store, hands full of bags, only to find her in the hallway, crouched slightly as she rearranged a stack of magazines on a small table near the entrance. She looked up at me, a mischievous glint in her eyes that immediately set my heart racing. "Ah, I see you've discovered my unwritten rules," she said, tilting her head, her voice teasing yet warm. "Some people ignore them, some follow them, and some test them deliberately." I laughed nervously, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. "I didn't mean to," I said, though my fingers twitched as I reached to adjust a bag, brushing against hers in the process. The touch was brief, but the warmth lingered far longer than it should have. She straightened, moving closer under the pretense of fixing a crooked rug. Her shoulder brushed mine lightly, and I felt an electric thrill run through me. It wasn't overt or forceful, it was subtle, intimate, a small gesture that carried an unspoken invitation. I realized that the rules she had set weren't about discipline. They were about connection, about creating moments where proximity, tension, and curiosity could grow. "You know," she said softly, bending slightly so her eyes met mine, "sometimes rules are meant to be bent. Or broken. But only by the right person." Her gaze held mine just a second too long, and I felt the familiar mix of exhilaration and hesitation twist in my chest. I tried to respond with humor, making a small joke about the fern I had moved the other day, but it fell flat against the intensity of her presence. Instead, she laughed, a low, melodic sound that seemed to vibrate through the hallway. I couldn't help but grin, feeling drawn into a playful game that neither of us needed to define. Over the next few minutes, we tested boundaries in small, innocent ways. She would hand me something, and our fingers would brush. I'd move a chair slightly, and she'd pretend to scold me, only to let her hand linger lightly on my arm. The closeness was subtle but intoxicating, a slow, simmering fire that left me acutely aware of every movement, every glance. At one point, she leaned down to adjust a misplaced book on a low shelf, and our heads nearly touched. I caught a faint whiff of her perfume, warm, soft, familiar, and felt a pull that was impossible to ignore. The hallway, once mundane, had transformed into a stage for unspoken flirtation, a private world where tension and anticipation could build without words. Finally, she stepped back, her hands folded gracefully in front of her. "I think we'll have to see how far these little rule breakings go," she said with a wink. My chest tightened, a mixture of longing and nerves. Every small interaction with her seemed to draw me closer, yet the unspoken rules, of restraint, of patience, of slow discovery, kept the desire suspended, teasing, and deliciously unresolved. As I walked back to my apartment, the echo of her laughter lingered in the hallway, mingling with the warmth that had taken residence in my chest. I knew one thing for certain: the game of rules, touches, and glances had only just begun. The evening was quiet, almost hushed, as if the world outside had paused to let us exist in our own little sphere. String lights had been draped across the balcony during the day, and now their soft glow bathed everything in a warm, golden hue. I found her already there, leaning against the railing, arms crossed loosely, eyes tracing the city lights in the distance. "Beautiful night," she murmured without turning, her voice soft, reflective. I stepped closer, letting the warmth of her presence guide me. "It is," I agreed, though my attention was entirely on her. There was something fragile and honest in the way she held herself tonight, a quiet tension that drew me in irresistibly. I stayed a respectful distance away, yet every instinct told me to close it. She finally looked at me, eyes catching mine under the soft glow. "There's something I've been meaning to say," she began, her voice catching just slightly, betraying the confidence she normally wore like armor. She paused, a brief hesitation that made my chest tighten. "I didn't expect this." Her gaze softened, and I realized she was as aware of the unspoken connection between us as I was. I swallowed, heart pounding, and found the courage to speak. "I feel it too. I've felt it since the first day." My voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of truth. "I don't want to rush it. I can't ignore it." Her hand moved almost unconsciously, brushing against mine. The contact was light, tentative, yet electric. I felt the warmth spread from my fingers to my chest, a quiet heat that made my pulse quicken. She didn't pull away, didn't step back. Instead, she let the moment stretch, allowing us to exist in that delicate space of shared acknowledgement. "I've been hesitant," she admitted, her thumb brushing lightly over the back of my hand. "Because I didn't know if this, what we feel, was possible. Or right." Her eyes held mine, filled with both caution and longing, and the vulnerability in her voice struck me deeply. I closed the gap just slightly, careful not to crowd her, letting my hand rest near hers, the brush of our arms sending a quiet thrill through both of us. "It's right," I said softly. "At least, it feels right." A small, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips, and I felt the tension I'd carried for days start to release, replaced by a warmth that wrapped around me like sunlight on skin. We didn't rush, didn't leap forward physically. This wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about the quiet acknowledgement that we had crossed a boundary of friendship, of distance, and entered a shared space of emotional intimacy. For the first time, we simply sat together, side by side, shoulders occasionally touching, hands close but not fully entwined, breathing in the same night air. The city hummed softly below us, but up here, there was only the quiet rhythm of two hearts slowly aligning, a shared acknowledgement that something meaningful had begun. And in that moment the rules, the age gap, the hesitation, they all melted away, leaving only the possibility of what could unfold, slowly, deliberately, and with care. The days that followed our quiet confession felt lighter somehow, as though the world had shifted just enough to make space for something new. The tension that had hovered between us transformed into a comfortable closeness, like the soft settling of sunlight across a room. We no longer needed elaborate gestures to acknowledge what was growing between us. The small touches, the shared smiles, and the occasional brush of fingers spoke volumes. That evening, I found her on the balcony again, this time with 2 steaming mugs of tea. The string lights glowed gently above, casting a warm halo around her. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing me a cup, her fingers brushing mine in the exchange. The touch was brief, but I felt it linger, like the memory of a note played softly on repeat. We settled side by side on the narrow bench, shoulders occasionally touching, the heat of the tea warming our hands and the space between us. She leaned back, resting lightly against me at one point, and I felt the steady rhythm of her breathing, the quiet certainty of her presence. It was intimate, yet completely innocent, a physical closeness that mirrored the emotional bond we had built slowly, deliberately. "Do you think rules are really meant to be broken?" I asked softly, teasing, though my heart raced in anticipation of her response. She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and softened her whole expression. "Sometimes," she admitted, leaning just slightly closer so that our shoulders brushed again. "But it depends on who's breaking them, and why." Her gaze held mine, steady and unflinching, and in that moment, I realized she meant more than just the little apartment rules we had played with over the past weeks. We laughed softly, sharing stories about the absurdities of daily life, the minor missteps and small rebellions that had brought us together. Every glance, every gentle brush of hands, every lingering smile deepened the quiet understanding between us. I noticed the warmth of her presence more acutely than ever, the subtle perfume she wore, the way her hair caught the light, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat whenever our proximity shifted. By the time the night had grown fully dark, there was a sense of completeness in the air. The age gap, the hesitations, the playful rules, all of it had melted into a shared intimacy that felt natural and right. I realized that we had created something rare, a connection built not on urgency or drama, but on slow, deliberate care and mutual respect. As we finally stood to go inside, our hands brushed again, lingering slightly before we parted. "Good night," she said softly, and I noticed the warmth in her eyes that mirrored my own. No grand declarations were necessary. Everything had already been said in the quiet, meaningful touches, in the smiles that spoke volumes, and in the steady rhythm of 2 people slowly finding each other. Walking back to my apartment, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The rules had been bent, boundaries tested, and hearts revealed, and what remained was a bond strong enough to carry forward. The promise of what was to come didn't need words, it existed in the simple, profound affection we had discovered together, a love that had been allowed to grow gently, fully, and beautifully. If you felt the slow burn tension between them, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories of love, connection, and unexpected moments. Share your thoughts in the comments. What rule would you dare to break for someone special?